Welcome to De-risking Innovation in Uncertain Environments. Thank you for joining us today. My name is Jen Sweet, and I'll be helping out today's webinar. We hope you get a lot of value out of this session and enjoy the content, whether you're watching this live or on demand. Talking about innovation today, we have Nilofer Erdebel, founder and CEO of Spring to Innovation. Nilofer is a TEDx Ottawa speaker and the author of the international best-selling book, Future Proofing by Design. She has dedicated her career to helping organizations achieve remarkable advancements through design thinking principles. And with that, I'm very excited to pass it over to Nilofer.
Thank you so much, Jen.
You're
Welcome, everyone. Really happy to see you guys. Well, I guess interact with you guys. And so for me to be able to better understand you, it really helps out if you don't mind writing your name in the chat and where you're coming from, so that as I'm chatting and talking about innovation in uncertain times, it's a lot easier for me to be able to gear it towards the audience that's with us today. So as we're getting started, I want to take a poll. For those of you on the call, how many people have worked in or are exposed to an innovation lab? And so, Jen, if you don't mind starting up the poll, have you worked in an innovation lab? Have you worked with an innovation lab? Or you have no idea what that is? And it's really fascinating. What's happening these days is the terminologies for the different labs are changing as well. Some people call them centers of excellence, and innovation labs have moved into transformation labs, and now they're actually also being called digital readiness labs as well. So it might be a lab, it might be a hub, there's different names for it. So I'll give you guys one more minute to finish off the chat. All right. So it's looking like a few people have worked in a lab, a number have worked with one, and a number aren't as familiar with what an innovation lab is. And so these are really great. In terms of what is an innovation lab, it's we're going to get into that as we go through the webinar, but at the end of the day, it's either a space or a group of people that have been assigned to create new products, new services, new policies, try out new technologies so that it's getting the organizations ready for the future. So as we're chatting today, like I mentioned, I like it very interactive. Thanks for everybody that's been writing in the chat where you're coming from. Lots of people from around Ontario from the looks of it. Today we're going to talk about de-risking innovation in uncertain environments, and we are definitely in uncertain environments. And so we need to actually be able to find new ways to move forward with less risk and more clarity. And a lot of the time, people feel like innovation is risky, and it's really not. And so we're going to explore some tools for identifying hidden assumptions, aligning stakeholders, and designing low-risk experiments that build knowledge and momentum. So it's really important to de-risk innovation right now as we're delivering value while minimizing waste, resistance, and rework, because a lot of organizations are being asked to do more with less. And a lot of people have the assumption that innovation might be something risky, and it's actually something that I consider a tool in order to be able to de-risk what's happening. And innovation can be used all across organizations, whether it's strategy, product creation, process or service innovation, just thinking about new ways of doing things and coming up with new products. But it could also be with an organization that's already working, that has processes and people in place, but there's a need now to work differently as there might be fewer people in the organization or as new technologies are being brought in. So innovation is not risky. It's actually often innovation is too unclear. So, what I mean by that is that a lot of the time, people don't identify well enough what innovation means in their organizations and to their company, and then maintaining that same definition. And so, I always think of de risking by design, not by default. So, often organizations are trying to manage risk by adding more layers of process and control, but at the end of the day, they're not addressing the symptoms. So we want to make sure that we're looking at the root causes of risk and working on de-risking through that. So the solution in order to be able to do that is through human-centered approach. Some people call it design thinking, and there's different names for it. And it can also involve a number of other methodologies. But at the end of the day, it's about having deeper clarity early on to uncover assumptions, engage stakeholders and users, and to spot potential failure points before investments are made. Because the earlier that you start in an initiative, um, taking a look at the assumptions, the easier it is to pivot. And that's really important in times where there's a lot of uncertainty, is the ability to pivot and to be able to pivot quickly. So de-risking by design and not default is a lot about risk managed not at the launch of a product or a service, but super early on. And a lot of organizations are so quick to jump into solution mode that they don't spend enough time in the problem statement to understand what is the challenge that we're looking to solve, let alone thinking about who are the people that are involved in the problem. It's also really important to discover and empathize with the people you're trying to create impact for, to identify hidden risks. Because sometimes we make so many assumptions about the people that we're delivering or trying to deliver value for to, that we don't necessarily realize that those assumptions are the things that are going to create the most risk. And then designing with end users helps avoid building the wrong solution as well too. I know I've been in organizations certainly where we haven't actually talked to the end users before we started building our solutions, and then we get it out to market or into the hands of our end users that might even be in the organization, and then they don't end up liking it, or there's something that could have made it even better. I always talk about an example of an initiative that I was spearheading many years ago, working in an IT organization. And it took about 6 months to pull together a number of leading edge partners to create a solution. And then it took 2.5 years for people to start using it, because I didn't actually spend enough time with the end users to think through what it is that they actually really want. And then finally, it's a lot about prototyping and being iterative and creating iterative feedback loops to help mitigate failure before it scales. And this is really important because a lot of the time, organizations, if they're doing prototyping and testing, it's to be able to validate whether or not a solution is working, rather than prototyping and testing to validate an idea before it even gets into the implementation phase. And then the feedback component of it, because people are constantly changing, our environments are changing, and especially because this is uncertain times, you'll probably be noticing there's so much change going on all at the same time. And so how do we make sure that we're taking that into account? And that's with those feedback loops and building systems in place so that those feedback loops are around to be able to make sure that we are either on the right course or are able to change course as we need it. So one thing that's really important about innovation in uncertain times is defining what innovation means in an organization and getting leadership to align on what innovation means. It's super essential for innovation to be successful. A lot of the time, I've seen labs go up because people think, oh, we need innovation in our organization. Let's fund it. Let's put people in it, without thinking through clearly enough what they're hoping and expecting from the lab itself and the people, whether it's short term or long term, if it's about increasing revenue, if it's about saving money, or both. Sometimes it's exploratory. Sometimes you're looking for incremental innovation. Sometimes you're looking for disruptive. Sometimes it's about leveraging technology, especially as new technologies are coming in, or sometimes it's about creating tangible value or intangible value. Getting really clear on what innovation means for your group, for your team, for your department and organization, I think is essential in order to be able to have innovation be successful in these uncertain times. And you really want to think about this as an organization um, before the lab's even sourced, because the type of people that you want to be working in the lab have to be, their mindset has to be geared towards these things. So a lot of the time we have worked with innovation labs. I have been program managing innovation labs, bringing together ecosystems of innovation labs. And at the end of the day, even if we don't start with it, in order to continue to get funding in year 2, 3, 4, 5, we need to be able to showcase the return on investment. And so that return on investment, the metrics for it depend on why the innovation lab was set up. And so it could be for financial outcomes, it could be for operational efficiency, it could be for customer value adding or long-term capability. And you can do a combination of these things too. It doesn't have to be one or the other, as long as it's really well stated for everybody working in the lab and working with the lab as well too. I see too often innovation labs want to get people in and starting to work with them, or teams that are looking to be innovative. They take on projects and initiatives that don't necessarily fit their mandate, and they do some great work, but at the end of the day, in order for them to continue to thrive, it really helps to have these return on investment metrics being recorded early on and continuing to do it throughout and afterwards. And so sometimes the innovation ROI needs to take into account broader impact as well. So marketing positioning or capability building, long-term growth. At the end of the day, innovation is about providing flexibility for the organization and for the people in the organization. Again, if you have questions, feel free to put them in the Q&A, or if you want to add comments in the chat, feel free to add them in. The thing that I really love talking about is aligning stakeholders. And the reason for this is because so many times I've been in rooms where everybody is nodding their head like bobbleheads and thinking, okay, everyone is agreeing with what's being said. That's not necessarily the case. Sometimes people are thinking about something different. Sometimes people are too afraid to ask questions. And so, as you are looking at being innovative, making changes in your organization, if people aren't disagreeing with you or aren't asking tough questions, they might not be aligning with you. So, what does that mean? Is once they're outside of the room, once they're outside of the lab, they might be following their own agenda, and it might not be from a place of ill will, but only because they're not understanding or are able to align on what innovation is all about. And so when I work with organizations, I talk a lot about aligning around the challenge that you want to be solving or the purpose of the organization or the team, aligning around how much risk you want to take on. And so if you're looking for incremental changes and shifts and innovation, you're going to have initiatives that you're working on that are quite different than if you're looking for disruptive innovation. And I would say a lot of labs want a combination of both. So things that are more longer term with things that are shorter term in order to be able to fully thrive. But again, it's up to people in the organization to figure that out. And then the other component of it is making sure that we are setting out what success looks like. And so aligning around what success looks like. And it sounds really simple, but it actually takes a lot of time and intent in order to be able to do these things. So there's a lot of hidden assumptions that get in our way. Why are we bad at spotting risk? And what do we do about it? So we're actually wired to overlook risk. And I know that sounds funny, but in fast-paced environments, um, we're so focused on delivering what needs to be delivered that we don't take the time to pull back, to pause, and question some of the assumptions. And this reflection is super important because we can only see what's in front of us. And if you aren't looking at the hidden assumptions, there's a lot of risks around you that you're not taking into consideration. So, how can you pull up a little bit more and spend a little bit of time reflecting? And I know when we are in uncertain times, it feels like we're a lot more pressed and rushed for time, but that's also the time, the moment that we need to actually think about, are we doing the right things? Are we spending the resources on the right things? And is there stuff that we are making assumptions around that we might be able to test earlier on so that we can make sure that it's not going to be an issue for us as we invest more and more money and people into initiatives and projects. So I talk a lot about deeper clarity. It's a methodology that we've created, which is a combination of human-centered design, alignment, mindset, and strategic foresight. And it's the shift in mindset that helps leaders uncover risks that traditional approaches miss. And so risk does often hide in assumptions and not in the data. And that user-focused approach really helps teams to be able to ask better questions early on. And I think that's where our power is in being able to ask questions early on in order to be able to get at what those risks are. And the method surfaces blind spots. And so as we bring in diverse perspectives, we're able to see a lot more than what we're seeing. So an example of how we overlook risk, sometimes we actually underappreciate or overestimate how much risk that we're going to be going through as well. It all depends on what's happened to us in our past or more recently as well. When I think about earthquake insurance, sales of earthquake insurance go up a lot more after an earthquake. But when you look at the statistics, an earthquake is least likely to happen after a major earthquake has happened. Well, after the aftershocks. So, how do we identify hidden assumptions? A lot of it is about talking to customers and bringing customers in from the start and keep talking with them. So, a few months ago, I was talking to a fairly new organization that was working on a technology, and they started out the company with people that had a lot of experience, and they took a look at their customers to understand what they felt the needs of their customers were. And then they actually went out and talked to their customers to understand, how would you prioritize these needs for yourself? And then once they understood that, they started creating a product, and then they continue to go back to their customer base, to they call it a customer council, in order to be able to get feedback every 30 to 90 days, depending on the organization. So going back and asking, here's what we've been working on. Is this still a priority for you? And when you think about the work that you're doing, how often are you going back to your customers and thinking through what they need? And then a lot of this is about finding out about rules, policies, and regulations in organizations. Sometimes we make assumptions on what a rule or a policy or a regulation might be, but it's really important to test those assumptions, to actually go in and talk with people to figure out if they are actually the right assumptions to be making. I know there's a lot of organizations that have tons of policies, and it's so hard to go through all of those. And so, if you're able to um, go through them rather than going based on hearsay, it's going to make a huge difference in terms of the outcomes that you're going to end up having. And then the other thing, in order to be able to de risk in times of uncertainty, is to learn from failure and to reflect. So failure doesn't mean that you don't try it again. And oftentimes in organizations, we hear that people have tried it before, so they don't want to try it again. It's really important that if something has failed, to take a look at it, pull back, reflect on why it went in a way that you didn't expect it to go. And then if you are trying it again, understanding what has changed in order to be able to make sure that the initiative is going to be successful going forward. And then you want to identify how people are going to learn from the failure as well too. A lot of the times in organizations, there'll be a lessons learned at the end of a project, and sometimes people don't even show up for that. And so, how are you bringing all of that in to be able to de-risk for the future is super important. And that's through creating systems in an organization and to be part of the culture. And it's really all about thinking about how can we do things differently? How can we learn from things that went well and things that didn't go well? And finally, it's in order to be able to de-risk in times of uncertainty, it's the low risk experiments to build knowledge and momentum. When things are so uncertain, it really helps to take a look at the bigger problem and then to be able to break it up into smaller chunks and then do iteration in order to be able to de-risk. Sometimes it's about small prototyping and testing along the way. Last month, I was chatting with somebody that was responsible for actually interior design of office spaces. And they were looking at investing $500,000 to be able to add a feature functionality into the desks and cubicles of all of their employees at their headquarters. And because it was such a large sum of money, they actually decided to pull back and do a small prototype on one of their floors. And so instead of investing 500,000, they invested 10,000. And when they did that, they realized that, hey, wait a minute, this isn't really making a difference to our people. And because of the lower risk experiment, they were able to save a lot of time and money because they continue to do the low risk experiments. And sometimes it's really hard to do, but it makes a huge difference in the long run. And I know in organizations, people are more rewarded for new things rather than being able to save money. But as the times are becoming more uncertain, saving money is a higher priority. And so, how can you be more effective in what you're doing? And then, as we're thinking about low risk experiments, sometimes you can actually experiment and test out ideas. And so, what I mean by this is you might have an implementation cycle, but you can also put in some opportunities for people to be able to test out ideas in an implementation platform so that they're able to see if it works to showcase it to clients before they do a full-fledged implementation. The final thing I want to touch on here is managing risk with data and foresight. So much innovation is happening and there's a lot of data available. How can you use strategic foresight and scenario planning to test out innovations to think about what potential futures could hold? So organizations aren't standalone. They have customers and they have people in other parts of the organization. They're all shifting at the same time. And so how can we pull back and think about the different futures that might be there for us, for our customers? And part of this actually does mean that you can leverage AI, data analytics, market intelligence to continue to monitor what's happening outside of your organization, to monitor what's happening with your clients as well, in order to be able to de-risk innovation. So when we're thinking about innovation in uncertain times, the goal is to build resilience and future readiness while keeping financial risk in check. And I think that's probably the most important addition in the next little while is to keep financial risk in check more than anything else. And so with innovation and with D for clarity, you can make smaller bets, and so taking a complex problem and chunking it into smaller sizes, and also doing some experimentation, prototyping, and testing, doing faster cycles as well. How can you speed up what you're doing? And stronger customer anchoring too. So working with the customers to understand them at a deeper level, to be able to ideate, come up with ideas with them, to be able to prototype and test with them, and in faster cycles again. And probably the most important, I think, is alignment at the leadership level. So what does innovation mean to them? How do they want it measured? How are they championing or supporting you? And then at the end of the day is aligning around the risk. What kind of risk tolerance are they willing to handle? I remember working in an organization and at the time it was called a tiger team, which later I think some places still call them tiger teams as well too, but innovation labs or hubs, digital transformation units, centers of excellence, and now digital readiness. At the end of the day, what they wanted us to do was come up with innovative products. Well, that's such a broad area. And so we actually struggled in ambiguity for at least 6 months. And we're trying to do a great job. We're trying to deliver. But when leadership themselves wasn't aligned at what innovation meant, do we try to work in the space that we're currently in? Do we try to explore a different area? Do we do a product? Do we do a service? It's too much ambiguity for people. And so the more you can get alignment at leadership, the easier it will be to actually be more successful in innovation. So at the end of the day, innovation risk is untested assumptions and misalignment. And I think that's really important for people to understand, especially as they consider what the return on investment is going to be, how they're going to measure return on investment, and how they're going to measure the success of their innovation initiatives. So I'm going to open this up for Q&A. If anybody has any questions, super happy to take them. If you want to talk about some of the innovation work that you're doing, super happy to talk about that as well too. I always like it more interactive, and I noticed there's a lot of people from across Canada joining in, from departments and from municipalities. And so either put your questions in the Q&A or in the chat itself. Okay, so I have a question that I have that I can start answering, and then I can answer some additional ones. So, what would evidence of progress look like in the short term? So that's a really good question. And I think it matters. It definitely matters how big the project or initiative is, what short term looks like, and evidence of progress. But if you're looking at it from a financial perspective, the short term progress is a lot harder to measure, especially if you're looking to increase the number of customers you have. But for the customer focus component of it, taking into consideration what your customers are doing, how they're changing, I think it's a lot easier to have evidence around that as well too. So a few more questions in the Q&A. One obstacle I often run into with organizations is that innovation is seen as dispensable when cost cutting is necessary or resources are tight. How do you suggest contending with this sort of mindset? Okay, that's a really good question because I've come across this and a lot in my own work life and as we consult and train other people. So when we're working with organizations where cost cutting is a big necessity, if you're able to do one of two things, either for your senior leadership and champions, making sure that they're fully on board with the mandate of your initiative or for the mandate of your innovation hub or lab, and making sure that you are delivering the value that they're looking for, I think it's more likely that the innovation will continue to be supported even with cuts. Cuts and reduction in resources is an opportunity for people to think differently and do things differently. In a weird way, when we have all the funding and resources and it's business as usual, people are more likely to want to hold on to the same mindset. But when there's a lot of cuts coming and there isn't that disposable income or that disposable funding available, people are more open to doing things in a different way. And I think that's when innovation can really start up too, is people are more open to looking at the policies and how things are done, or also bringing in technology as well too. I know There's a lot of organizations, especially larger ones, that have access to certain tools that would make things a little bit easier or faster. And because they're so busy with other things and cost cutting is not as big of a factor, they haven't necessarily taken advantage of that. So that's definitely one way of helping to make sure that more focus is actually put on innovation when there's all this uncertainty and there's all this cost cutting. And then the other component too is switching the mandate and making sure that everyone is on board with the innovation projects, focusing on cost reduction. And that could be all over the place. But the most important thing is to make sure that the senior leaders recognize and reward cost cutting. The reason I say this is there's so much focus on delivering, and if processes are already in place and they're not, they can't necessarily see how much waste is being done from that. And so if you're able to innovate a process and do some cost cutting that way, whether it's the number of people, the number of hours wasted, depends on how you're measuring it, then you're actually able to deliver a lot more value to the organization. But your organization has to recognize that. And I think that's the challenge that we don't see in many organizations is even when they're cost cutting, the reward for cost cutting isn't there. It's just part of what they're doing. And so that's why I love going in and working with leaders of an organization and getting them to align around that too, is if cost cutting is such a big focus, then let's start promoting, resourcing, and rewarding initiatives that are doing the cost cutting. I hope that answers your question. There's a second question here on, could you elaborate more on strategies on how to obtain alignment at leadership level? Okay, that's a really, really good question. So number of factors to this. For alignment at a leadership level, a lot of the time I see people nodding, and especially at leadership, and they're not necessarily agreeing, but they don't want to ruffle any feathers, or sometimes they're not fully understanding, or sometimes there's just so much change happening. There's so much on their plate that they don't know how to create space for the new initiatives that another team is talking about that they need to be able to provide resources for. And so for leadership alignment, I think some tough conversations need to happen. And that is by bringing everyone into the room and helping them understand one another, one another's challenges, one another's expectations, measures of success, what their priorities are, and then understanding how they might be able to balance what's on their plate versus what's on other people's plates. And so a lot of alignment at a leadership level is about having tough conversations, asking tough questions. Four areas that I would really highly recommend alignment at a leadership level on is, what's the challenge you're looking to solve? I think the purpose of the department, the team, the project, the initiative, the policy, the grant, whatever you're working on, the regulation, the challenge has to be really clearly articulated, and what success looks like has to be aligned on by all of the leaders themselves. Second thing is around risk tolerance. And so understanding how much risk they're able to have an appetite for. Um, Definitely around roles and responsibilities too. And then how do you make sure that everyone is going to continue to stay aligned? Alignment is not a one-time thing. And I think this is what a lot of organizations struggle with. You need to create systems for continuous alignment. And remember, the organization that I was talking about goes back to their customer base every 30 to 90 days. And so they're aligning with their customers. And so that's the fourth thing too, by the way, around alignment, is understanding your end customers and aligning around your end customers. But if you aren't doing the alignment internally with senior leaders continuously, then it's really easy to go off path. But the understanding one another and understanding the challenge you're looking to solve and what measures of success need to be, and getting agreement on that initially is really huge in making sure that you're actually able to maintain that alignment going forward. So, what role does data play in innovation and risk management? That's our next question. So, data is another perspective. So, even though we might be going and talking to our customers, even though we might have assumptions on what's going on, there's data being measured, and there's a reason why that data is being measured. So, understanding what the data is saying, understanding who is providing that data and who is using that data is part of understanding data's role in innovation and in risk management. So I mentioned earlier, just because you did things one way doesn't mean that it's not going to work again a second time. And so data can also help us understand the differences that might be happening. And it's just it is a huge another perspective. Oftentimes, people in organizations that I've talked to feel like they don't have enough data, and they usually have a lot of data, whether they're being measured or somebody else is being measured. The challenge is that that data is not being disseminated to the rest of the organization, or they don't necessarily know why that data had started being collected. So data plays a huge role in innovation and risk management. It's you want to make sure that you're collecting the right data in order to be able to support innovation and to be able to determine whether or not you are taking the risk that you want to be taking. If it's going to tell you if you're taking too much risk. And then it's also telling you about trends as well. So you might be able to, from the data that you have, take a look at how your end users have shifted or are shifting along the way. And at the end of the day, the more data that you can turn into insight and knowledge, the easier it is to make decisions from a higher level. I hope that helped out. Next question is, who should lead innovation in an organization? Amazing question. So my point blank answer to that is everyone should be part of innovation, but innovation needs champions at the very senior level, and to be able to be disseminated down the organization. So what I mean by this is I've gone into many organizations where senior leaders are really want to be more innovative. They want to support their people in being innovative. And then people at a working level also really want to be innovative, but that hasn't been disseminated throughout the whole hierarchy of an organization. And so leaders need to lead innovation, and they need to be able to align as an organization on what innovation means for them, and then making sure that they have strategies in place for the folks that are throughout the whole organization, and getting people at all parts of the organization to be part of the innovation. So what I like to think about is that businesses, organizations are systems, and you can't just have one person making a decision and having everybody expect to be able to be innovative based on that one decision. A lot of work has to be done in being able to explain what that means to everybody. And then it also has to go the other way around, is what's happening on a working level is super important in order to be able to get filtered up throughout the organization, and so up and across. So some groups in an organization are much closer to customers, to their end clients, and they can see shifts starting to happen, or they can make decisions that are going to make their customers happy that might be different than what was happening in the past. And so there's lots of room at a working level to be innovative as long as they're being supported, and then to be able to take that knowledge and take it up to the different levels and through different parts of an organization. So oftentimes in organizations, we are expecting people to work collaboratively, but we don't necessarily know what each of the different groups does. And so that makes it difficult to be innovative as an organization. If you understand what each of the groups does, and then are able to take insights from all the different groups and be able to understand the shifts that they're making. I think that's going to make innovation a lot easier to do, but it really requires a lot of communication. And because things are changing so rapidly, I think priorities in organizations are also shifting. We chatted about cost-cutting measures most recently, especially in public sector organizations. And so when that happens, the priorities around innovation need to be around cost cutting and then filtered down and across too. And as people are working with different organizations, whether it's citizens or businesses working with their customers, what is the behavior that is being rewarded? What is the behavior that they're seeing in the end customers that needs to be taken into account as shifts are being made within the organization? And so, uh, short answer is I think senior leadership should be leading innovation, but we chat about innovation labs. It's not one group, it's not one person, it's everybody in the organization and everybody understanding how they can contribute to innovation. Um, Next question is, who within the organization is responsible for deciding how the data and reports should be disseminated and to which levels of the team it should be shared? That's a really good question. I think it depends on the organization. For larger organizations, I would say it's still some data has to be decided at the top level, and some data needs to be decided at a working level. And so you need to have frameworks in place for decision making in the organization and provide authority and accountability to everyone in the organization to be able to make these decisions on how the data and the reports need to be disseminated. And I do feel like there's a lot of information out there. And so I really appreciate this question because sometimes there's too much information. And so, how do you decide as an organization what information is really important to move through? When we're talking about innovation, especially in uncertain times, I think as your organization is shifting and as the priorities of the organization are shifting, it's really important to have the priorities at a top level disseminate down, and then also the priorities at the other levels be shared with senior leaders as well as across the board too. How often people are looking at that, I think depends on the organization and the speed that they are moving at. Um, Sometimes, especially in more technology fields, the environment is changing so rapidly that priorities can shift from one week to another. And if you're not sharing that with everyone in the organization, even though they have a sandbox for what innovation should look like, if the shift in direction, shift in priority isn't brought forward to them, then it's really hard for them to understand um, what they should be focusing in on. And so within an organization, in terms of deciding the data and the report and where it should be disseminated to, depends on the organization, but having a framework for who data is being sent to, who the reports are being sent to, and allowing people to make their own decisions, I think is the most important part of it. I think we have time for one more question if folks want to pipe in. I have one here that I had asked before the webinar, but feel free to ask any other questions you might have. So I will do this question. How are we involving the right people early to build alignment and reduce resistance? This is a really, really good question. And so unfortunately, we won't always know who the right people are that we need to build alignment. If we're starting at the top, that's pretty easy. There's org structures in place to help us figure out who should be involved in the alignment component of it. If I'm going into an organization and I'm looking to get alignment, I want to make sure that the team that's currently working on the initiative is there for the alignment, especially if we're doing a revamp. And maybe it's a reservice design, redoing processes. But we want to make sure that we have the people that are doing the reimagining as well as the people that are currently doing it, leadership and influence from the customers. So the more we understand our customers, the easier alignment becomes, because at the end of the day, you want to make sure you're creating value for your customers, whether they're in the organization or outside the organization. And I think when people understand their customers at a deeper level, they start to understand what they need to align around. And then the other parts are aligning around roles and responsibilities, aligning around risk tolerance. So purpose and the customer centricity perspective of it really help lead the way for alignment and making sure that you have the right people early on to build alignment. So with that, I'm going to pass it over to Jen. And if you do have any more questions, feel free to write them in the chat or send us an email, and I'm super happy to have a conversation.
Hi, everyone. Well, thank you, Nilofer, for all the insightful content you shared with us today. And a big thank you to everyone who took the time to join us this afternoon. I hope you found our discussion insightful, and we encourage you to explore deeper clarity and our LinkedIn network and our training options, which I will link in the chat right now for everyone. For those of you who may have joined us late or wish to visit any part of today's session, we will be sending out a recording of the webinar along with additional resources that were mentioned during our discussion. So please keep an eye on your email for that. Additionally, we'd love to hear your feedback on today's webinar. Your suggestions and thoughts are incredibly important to us as they help us improve and make future sessions more beneficial. Keep a lookout for a follow-up survey where you can share your input. For more information about deeper clarity or design thinking, don't forget to check out our website or follow us on our social media channels for all our upcoming webinars and other events. We have some exciting topics lined up, and we'd love to see you again. I will also put those channels in the chat, so anyone wishing to follow can. And thank you once again for your participation. We truly appreciate your time and interest, and we hope everyone has an amazing weekend. Thanks, everyone. Bye-bye.
Everyone, bye.